Long ago, there was a war involving cannibal giants and Native Americans known as the Paiute. In the end, the giants were destroyed. Legends and myth would swirl around the events for years, leading us to today and this episode. Demons exist. Also, Scott is always right.
You are now entering the realm of the freaky deaky. An unsuspecting stop at the crossroads of fantasy and reality, where the frayed edges of make-believe seep into this cookie-cutter white picket world you've been led to believe is far from extraordinary. What you're about to hear are true stories.
Alleged true stories.
Christian, just... okay? Tales of the strange and inexplicable thought only to exist in film and folklore. Although difficult to accept, we do not know everything about this reality. About time or space, what lies beneath the ocean's depths. And try though we might, the unchanging truth remains. There are some things we legitimately cannot explain logically. Folks, welcome back to the Freaky Deaky. We are excited to have you here once again as we dive into a story that has made the rounds time and time again, but I don't think we've touched on it briefly. And I think in episode 3, when we first did Giants, we touched on it very briefly. But today we're going to go a little deeper, and that is the tale of the Cannibal Giants of Lovelock Cave. And it's a doozy. And we ask one thing and one thing only. If you're new to the show, you listen to it in its entirety. And if you're a fan of what you hear, slap a 5-star review wherever you're listening. Tell your homies, tell your enemies if you want, whatever works for you, honestly. But if you're a fan of paranormal experiences, crazy out there stories, nonsensical soundboards, and unbelievably large helpings of dry humor, and co-hosts hitting the microphone when the other one's talking, then you are in the right spot, friends. And we're excited to have you here. What do you got for us, Christian?
All right. We begin with the ginger.
Wow.
This ginger just happened to be a giant.
The ginger giant. Wow.
Those who are familiar with the legendary and sometimes biblical giants will be familiar with the red hair. And it's typically in places where people don't have red hair. We'll go into the hair thing later in the episode.
I know you're going to try to pull off some weird, be like, oh, it's just the dirt or whatever. But we know the truth, Christian.
Yeah.
We get it.
Demons.
Lovelock
Cave is in Pershing County, Nevada. The nearby town would come to be named Lovelock. Both are named after an Englishman named George Lovelock, who established the town in 1866. Lovelock is a small town right now of about 1800 to 2,000 people.
I was like, wow, that's quite the jump. 18 or 2,000?
Yeah. Prior to the arrival of European settlers, there was a legendary tribe that called the area home. They were the Si-Te-Cah. They would come to be known as red-haired cannibal giants. Varying tales and bad archaeology make it hard to pin down the facts, but one thing is true. The Si-Te-Cah were legendary in the eyes of the Paiute. Did we mention who the Paiute were? We will. And would it be an obligatory apology for the mispronunciation of Native American names right now?
Yeah, there's that, but there's also, I've noticed in the past that when we do giant material, we get a extra large amount of hatred from folks for constantly interjecting stories and having, I mean, as you know what this podcast is all about, we just kind of do our own thing. And apparently people interested in giants and Nephilim and all that stuff are not interested in hearing anything outside of that content whatsoever. So if you're one of those people expecting to just get a story with absolutely zero fun in it, then this is not the show for you, and you should probably click off right now.
They can go find their own cannibal giant.
How about you go get locked inside a cave, huh?
Why does cannibal giants give me the feeling of, ho, 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 the green giant?
Wow.
I think that's how it went in the 70s.
Ho, 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 the green giant? Are you mixing Santa Claus and Jolly Green Giant?
I feel like it, but I swear that's what the commercial said.
Okay. You've been right once or twice on this podcast, Christian. We can go for a third.
Listeners, help me out. Older listeners.
Exclusively our listener base.
We'll mention here that while this area had been inhabited by peoples of the northern Paiute for perhaps thousands of years, they did not call themselves Paiute. Most are associated with the food they ate. So some would call certain groups of the Paiute fish eaters, Tule eaters. Tule is a plant.
Those are the people that eat the fish.
Yeah.
They stinky.
Or I wonder what they call the giants, man-eaters, like the song.
Yeah, great soundtrack for when they're eating all those people.
Hall & Oates.
Wow. entirely different vibe with Hall & Oates, but yeah.
Were you thinking of a different song called Maneater?
I was thinking of like the recent song called Maneater.
Oh.
I forget who it is, but some pop diva, I'm sure.
I'm thinking of the Hall & Oates that are playing every day when I go to work.
Nice.
No, it's not. The various groups associated with the Paiute would include the Comanche and Shoshone and would stretch from the deserts of California and Nevada up into Oregon and Idaho, which is crazy. Sometimes in the United States, the stories we've heard in the past, or like especially when I was young, it was always made out to be like Native Americans weren't that, they didn't have such a vast area that they controlled amongst different groups of their tribes and stuff like that.
I wonder why that is. I wonder why those are the stories you heard.
Well, it was the 70s. In these areas, you find languages that were related to many of the groups, and they would often go to war with Native Americans that had unrelated languages. So, as normal, they kind of allied if they spoke the same language. Generally, they were probably they came from the same place, all that kind of stuff.
It makes it a lot easier to communicate as well.
Right. And communication, or lack of communication, is usually what leads to war. Everything would, of course, change in a bad way with the arrival of the Europeans.
Wow. So you just had to throw that in there, didn't you?
I was trying every story
I read. Well, when the Europeans arrived, oopsie.
Yeah, every story I read said it differently. They said whites.
I'm
going with Europeans because
it's a little less racist.
And they were Europeans.
Wow.
The tales told of Si-Te-Cah were told prior to the arrival and would find new life when in 1911, 2 guano miners who had staked claim to Lovelock Cave would begin to find old and ancient artifacts. You know what guano is, right?
Christian, everyone here has seen Ace Ventura. We all know what guano is.
Was guano in Ace Ventura?
Yeah.
I watched that movie one time when it came out.
Well, this was in the second one.
I watched that one maybe too.
Well, then you're missing out on some high quality, high grade humor, Christian, and that's on you.
That's not my style of humor.
Yeah, we know.
David Pugh and James Hart were mining the guano and selling it. It would be sold as fertilizer in other parts of the country. When the two first started coming across artifacts, they tossed them into the dirt that they'd pulled out of the cave with the bat poop. So they would pull the guano out of the cave, sift through it, separate it from the dirt, and then throw the dirt and the artifacts in a pile, which would later be kind of dug through to find what was left in there as they were excavating the cave.
Weird choice to throw artifacts randomly in the dirt.
Capitalism. It was all about money. They just wanted to earn the money from the guano.
Like, is this bat poop? No, then send it back.
And I think we find that a lot, like the mounds, the Native American mounds that were torn down so farmers could have their fields of corn and stuff like that. So we hear the stories about them, but we don't have any evidence because they basically just
threw all the giant bones away.
Yeah.
Classic stuff, man. Not thinking for the future, turns out.
Right.
In the name of corn.
As their mining operations slowed down, they reported their finds in 1912. They contacted the Smithsonian, but they wanted to be paid for their find, and the Smithsonian only took donations.
Yeah, Smithsonian was like, how about instead of that, we take your findings, we hide them from the rest of the world, and we give you nothing. Does that sound fun?
That's what the conspiracy theorists say the Smithsonian does.
Not even conspiracy theorists, just people that are understanding of events that took place.
If there are giant bones at the Smithsonian, they're still there. They're just in the warehouse. They still pull out stuff constantly and recheck it. And I still don't understand why they would, especially why they wouldn't check if there were giants, because that would prove a lot of, in the eyes of a lot of people, the biblical tales of the Nephilim.
So does that surprise you then, why they wouldn't prove that, if everything else in the world scientific is kind of trying to point away from that? And then you find something?
America especially a lot of the leadership is very religious. Once the end of the world.
Sure.
And giants would help prove a biblical account.
I know, but a lot of and this is the end of the tangent. After this, we'll kind of cut this, but a lot of the people that are super religious aren't really religious. They are by mouth only, not by spirit or heart or whatever. It's all just to make them look better. Vote for me. I believe in my Sky Daddy.
I agree. I agree that that's the case. They ended up selling some of the stuff to small collectors, and some of it ended up in museums eventually. The fun truly began when a mummified body was found under 4 feet of guano.
Gross.
The remains were that of a 6-foot-tall man, but there's more. A rope was found around his neck. He also had ropes binding him from his ankles to his knees.
A little kinky there, but all right.
I'm going to add a little bit more to the kinkiness part of the story. I apologize.
Finally.
The tall man wasn't the only one in the cave. Mommy. That might be what was going on. There were 4 female skeletons with him.
Oh, yeah.
The women wore toe moccasins, and some had buckskin coats.
Are you telling me these women were showing off their toes?
Yeah.
Wow.
And tying up the man.
Hell yeah.
No.
It's popping.
It's popping.
Are you just picturing it? Or
No, I just had a
thought?
loss. Like my brain just lost what I was going to say next.
No, you're fantasizing, you little pervert.
True. No, I was not. Even though those toe moccasins sound hideous. Nah, man. Each person found in the guano had red hair. Pugh and Hart had their people contact the people at the University of California who were excited to take a look. A.L. Gruber of the university had one problem when it came to sending an archaeologist to investigate the cave. He had no one available because they were out looting
Sinners.
other Native American archaeological sites.
Wow. Christian brought a soapbox.
I did, but it's probably true because that's what we did back then. Remember, like when you hear about them going into King Tut's tomb, they basically destroyed a lot of stuff and artifacts getting to that.
Classic.
That's the way it was done back then.
It's probably the way it'd be done right now, too, if people could.
So Al Gruber decided to send the museum's guard, a man named Llewellyn Loud, which is kind of a cool name.
Llewellyn?
Yeah, Llewellyn Loud. The man had no formal training in archaeology. He was intelligent, though, and there must have been something about him that would make Gruber trust him with his excavation. It was more modern times. He probably had some pictures of Gruber and blackmailed him, but who knows what he had back then. Things were different back then. As I said, Loud would pick a spot and dig. He didn't set up grids to help keep track of everything, and he did not keep good records of what depths the artifacts and remains were found.
That's probably how I do things, too.
I mean, that's how most of us would, but when you're trained, it's a grid system. You pay attention to how deep you dig because that's how you can tell how long that stuff's been there.
Yeah, I'm like, that seems like a lot of work. How about I just start digging here, and if I find something, yippee.
Yeah. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of things that were discovered in the cave, besides the bodies.
A Game Boy Color.
That would be fascinating. There was a discovery of 11 duck decoys at Lovelock Cave, and it was unearthed in Pit 12, Lot 4. So that's kind of how Loud did it. He would dig a hole and call it...
This is Lot 4.
Yeah, pretty much.
My kind of man right there. Simple and to the point.
During the excavations conducted by M.R. Harrington and Llewellyn Loud, and this was in 1924, so they came back years later, and they were working for the Museum of the American Indian. I've never heard of that, but maybe back then it was. Among the decoys, 8 were fully painted and feathered, while the remaining 3 were unfinished. They were crafted from bundled tule, which is a type of long grass-like herb, and adorned with feathers and paints. In addition to the decoys, the excavation revealed feathers and 2 bundles of animal traps within the same pit, suggesting a connection to hunting practices of the inhabitants. Initially, attempts to date the decoys using radiocarbon dating in 1969 were unsuccessful due to loss of material. However, with advancements in dating techniques, particularly the development of the accelerator mass spectrometry. God damn it.
I'm just...
Spectrometry. AMS.
AMS?
Yeah.
What does that stand for?
Nothing. Samples were successfully dated. The duck decoys were dated to approximately 130 BC, and another one that they found there was dated to around 300 BC. And I think they're considered the oldest decoys found in the United States.
I mean, yeah, they got 300 years on Christ, Christian. What do you expect?
That is true.
That is true.
They also found a prehistoric sling. Speaking of religious stuff, I mean, a sling would pay, not with Christ, but an earlier tale had a sling. No, I'm just joking. I'm making a connection.
I have no idea what you're talking about, but okay.
It was a hand-woven textile sling. This one was collected in 1912, but not extensively studied until years later. The sling is recognized as one of the earliest examples found in North America, believed to have been used by the northern Paiute inhabitants for hunting, warfare, or recreational purposes. The sling was constructed using a simple knotting technique from a 2-ply yarn. Notably, the sling's design is reversible, and it is hypothesized to have been crafted from various locally available fibers. In addition to the sling, the cave yielded a variety of handmade textile items, traps, nets, and storage containers. The cave is said to have been inhabited 3,500 years ago, so 1500 BC, and it's been pretty much used in all that time up until the Paiute were forced to leave that area. All right. Let me take a drink.
Take a drink, Christian. You've earned it.
So we're going to talk about a woman named Sarah Winnemucca,
Nice.
which I think this cave has been called Winnemucca Cave too at various times.
That sounds familiar, yeah.
Sarah Winnemucca was a Paiute who wrote about her people in a book published in 1883. She wrote about the Si-Te-Cah, and while she couldn't pin down the time period that her people fought and killed the giants, she did estimate it to be during the 1500s or maybe even a little earlier.
Nice.
It's always hard to tell when it comes to cultures that rely on oral tales instead of written ones, which reminds me of the two girls from Lighton taken by giants. You couldn't really tell when that happened based on the story.
Yeah.
It could have been like 100 years before or 2,000 years before.
Or 8 minutes before.
Probably not then, because the guy would have seen them.
Okay, so only your options then, Christian. I see how it is.
In this case, yes. The Si-Te-Cah were not given a tribe name. They were referred to as legendary or barbaric or barbarians.
Wholesome.
Very wholesome. According to Sarah, the group we call giants were not a mythic fairy tale or a scary story to keep your kids safe. They would hunt down the Paiute, setting traps along trails that the Paiute used. They would even dig up the bodies of the dead to eat. And sometimes they ate their own dead. And I'm not sure if this is true, but one of the stories of the traps is they would basically dig a hole on the trails that the Paiute used. They would fall in, and then they would come get them and
Like, lunchtime.
eat them with their marshmallows over an open fire.
And whatever that Christmas song guy did.
Yeah. We know from the Wendigo tales that cannibalism is a major sin or taboo amongst the Native American. A cannibal is beyond redemption. It's funny because you see that in a lot of cultures throughout time. So it must have been a more common occurrence than it is now, back in the day.
Well, good to know it was always frowned upon.
Yeah. Not always. I mean, obviously.
Not by the people doing it. But
exactly.
the people watching are probably like, oh, goodness, I don't want to see that again.
What's funny is in Game of Thrones, they have a group of people that basically just go around eating people.
Hey.
They're not giants, but they're kind of different.
That sounds like they're a little different.
Sarah Winnemucca tells us that the Paiute tried to take some of the Si-Te-Cah and convert them to regular food.
Have you tried this muffin?
Or as I put in here, tried to convert them to a more civilized way of dining, which would again happen with the arrival of the Europeans.
Sure. You're welcome for those forks and spoons, mind you.
Which tells me the giants were European.
Wow.
No.
Could they get any more evil than that, Christian?
I think that's the basic. Whenever you hear about giants with red hair, that's kind of, there's a group of people out in the world, find them on YouTube, that'll say they were European.
Well, there's plenty of them, plenty of different tribes of giants, as far as I'm concerned.
But these guys were there before the Europeans. So
the plot thickens.
For me, it seems strange that they would have like brought flesh eaters into their camps and trusted them. But maybe they just didn't feel like genocide was the easiest way to go. Unlike
whom, Christian? Is it the Europeans again?
Unlike humans in general. It's not.
Nice save.
I like history, and you see this happen all over the place. They go in the past and just murder everybody in the whole town.
Yeah, that is true. But also, if you like history, you're saying essentially you like fairy tales because most of history is altered in some way, shape, or form.
Life is a fairy tale.
Okay.
This failed to taking them into and trying to convert them didn't work.
Wow,
so
shocking.
A decision was made that war would be taken to the Si-Te-Cah. Winnemucca says that the warriors of the coalition of the Paiute clans or tribes
The suspense is killing me.
I'm just making sure I wrote that right. Okay, Winnemucca says a coalition of the various Paiute tribes went to war. They would take on 2,600 Si-Te-Cah. The Paiute probably outnumbered the giants, and they had a large pool of warriors from various tribes to pull from. 2,600 is kind of hard to believe.
That's a lot of giants.
Now, if that number is correct, they weren't all in Lovelock Cave. They were just in the area. Lovelock Cave seems to be their final resting place. At first, the strongest and most skilled warriors would fire arrows at the barbarians, who would leap up and grab the arrows out of the air before firing back at the warriors. My feeling is when we get to Lovelock Cave, and I think a lot of people know what happened there, but we'll get to that. That was just the last few giants that were left or in the area at the time. So either they killed...
Spoilers, sorry.
Right. Either they killed all these giants or drove them off. At the end of the war, the giants were pushed into and trapped in Lovelock Cave. Surrounded, the Paiute attempted to give the Si-Te-Cah one last chance to reform. Stop eating people and you can live.
And they're like, but they're so tasty, damn it.
Pretty much. But the cannibals felt it would be better to die than give up human flesh. With no hope of conversion, it was decided the giants must never leave that cave.
Just an echo out from the cave being like,
nah, man.
Right before it gets, stop eating people. Oh, man.
That is one of the best button pushes I've seen.
I know.
Brush was piled up at the entrance.
Was it maybe the entrance that brush was piled up at?
Maybe it's the coffee.
I noticed last week when I didn't drink coffee beforehand that I was a lot clearer. And I have no idea how that works. I'm like, this shit's supposed to wake me up, and maybe it just ends up doing weird numbers to my bowels, and that's it.
I think it's something more with like your mouth, because I could feel that one after I took that drink. My tongue wasn't quite working right, and I could feel it as I was trying to say the word.
Made your tongue sleepy.
Brush was piled up at the entrance and set ablaze. Any cannibals that exited the cave to escape the flames and smoke were cut down by the waiting warriors. The fire burned for a while. Perusing the internet, you find many claims that black soot was found on the wall and ceilings of the cave. Now, I did watch some videos, and it does appear to be black soot. Now, that could have been a fire.
Sure. It
could have also been from people living in the cave. So,
well, I mean, hey, who's to say, really?
I mean, none of us now, because there's no written records. When Sarah's tribe came back the next day to make sure nothing had escaped the fire, they found a smoldering cave that smelled worse than your typical Sasquatch. All inside were dead. Maybe some had escaped, but they were long gone by then. Just a quick note on the Paiute. Other tribes, if you talk to them about the Paiute, would say they were pretty warlike. Just remember that, because we may talk about it toward the end when we kind of discuss everything.
And when you say warlike, you mean like warmongers themselves? Like they're always out looking for shit, or...
That's what that's what some of the other tribes in that region would say. Of course, that's what any tribe or any group of people vying for control of an area would say if somebody was stronger than them.
Sure.
When Loudon Harrington went back to do further digs, more stories were discovered. In one that came from a relative of Sarah, it says that this strange tribe that would become known as giants did have red hair. So there's people saying before the bodies were found that they had red hair. Like I said, I was watching a video of somebody walking around the cave.
And there's no, like, you can just go to the cave, right? There's no actual, it's not guarded off. It's not or anything like that.
I think it's run by like park rangers.
Okay.
You know, I think there was like a restroom out there and parking area and all that stuff. And the most recent video I saw, they actually put a wood deck in part of the cave.
Wow.
So you could walk up to the area where they were digging. And as you look in the cave, you can still see piles of dirt from the excavations. There's no more bat guano. That's all been removed.
Dang it. Probably what I was wanting to see.
Yeah. Well, probably when everybody started going in the caves, the bats probably got out or...
Like, we're done pooping here, that's for sure.
Or were exterminated, so they stopped pooping there. But I'm sure once, 1911 or 1912, a bunch of people with lights working in a cave ran them off. They probably found other caves.
Yeah, like, I'm trying to sleep in here. Excuse me.
Yeah. So I don't know, man. What do you think?
I think we already know what I think for the most part.
That's what I want you to tell. I want you to tell me these were Nephilim.
Well, there's no way to prove that for sure, but they are definitely Nephilim. No. Yeah, I don't know. It's a story that I've heard a bunch of times now, and it's a story I believe.
One of the things that makes me go with this story a little bit is my belief that giants weren't really 15, 20 feet tall. They were just tall.
Well, what's your definition of tall? If you say 6 feet, then I'm a giant. So
in the old days, thousands of years ago, you would have been pretty damn tall. But also, remember, we talked about the explorer that went through Florida and came across Native Americans that he called giants that were 7 feet tall. The chief was 7 feet tall. His son was 7 feet tall. So we know there's tall people.
Mm-hmm.
And if they were violent or not quite what the other inhabitants of that region were, they might be called giants or demons, or, later on in certain places, they would be called Nephilim.
Sure.
And my question always comes down to, were they really giants? Were they really 10, 15 feet tall? And how does that work? How can a humanoid be that tall and still function?
Well, if we're talking, supernatural entities, then I think it's highly possible that is, it's not even a crazy height. I mean, do you think 15 feet is tall, man? Biblically speaking, there's shit about cubits and all kinds of things. They talk about Og's bed being however many cubits by however. It's like gigantic, the 15 feet is almost like a toddler at that point. We're talking things that are tall as pines and all these different, look, there's so many stories out there that, granted, are all of them accurate? Probably not.
Probably not the ones that are called supernatural.
Well, then what other option is there, man? You want to know how people get so tall.
They don't get that tall. But they might get to be 7 feet tall.
Even 7 feet tall is pretty tall. I don't know. So you're saying everyone around those days was 5 feet tall?
Probably
3 feet tall or whatever.
No, they were mostly probably around 5 feet tall. And then you would have some that were 6 feet, some genetic variants.
Even that, let's say someone's 5 feet tall. This is roughly 2 feet. Okay.
Scott's holding up his hand, showing me 2 feet.
Yeah. This is the difference between a giant and a normal person? I don't think so, man. I think when you throw around the term giant, you got to be talking a lot taller than that. 7 feet is tall. That'd be like a baseline for me. 7 to 10, for sure. 7 to 12, absolutely.
I don't have to do that because
you don't believe in them.
I definitely don't believe in anything over maybe the typical thing we might find a human now.
And I'm sure you've looked into the stories of these gigantic skeletons being found and whatnot, and you just think all of those stories are made up. It's all BS.
I think some of them are made up. I'm not sure about all of them. I know for a fact that some of them are just people trying to make a buck on tourists.
Sure.
And
that
that's
happens
typical.
Across the board with anything, really. And
right.
So that's to be expected. And even if you were to say, let's say 75% of them, complete fabrications, that's at least 25% that you're like, well, I don't know what this is. I mean, what do you think about stuff like, what's the Paracas skulls or whatever? Is that what I'm thinking?
The ones that are misshapen?
The Maraca skulls.
Different part of the world.
Yeah. And so like everyone that sees that is like, well, that's, skull binding or whatever. That's the only explanation. But you're like, okay, but explain the fucking face then, man. The face doesn't even look human. And on top of that, there's like 3, I want to say there's 3 in human skulls. There's 3, what is it? The different lines that go over or whatever. When the skull is forming, it's all separate pieces. There's 3 of those pieces that come together in a line. And these skulls only have 2. Where's the third one that makes a human? And not only that, but if you look at how just the length of how long these skulls are elongated, no freaking way it's human.
I don't know, man. A lot of people were binding skulls in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
Going back to Lovelock Cave, I forgot to mention something. Sarah Winnemucca, who we should all look into because her story that she wrote in her book is fascinating. Also, probably the first autobiography written by a Native American.
Yeah, I think I've read parts of it when I was looking at this shit a while ago. But
yeah, and supposedly she wore a dress that her dad had given her when she would go do her speeches, and this dress was made
from the skulls of her enemies.
No, the red hair of the giant.
Kind of gross when you think about it, but I mean,
it's the same as using horse hair or whatever, deer buckskins. You're still
again kind of gross, but that's cool.
I mean, but also how you stay warm.
Sure.
Back in the day.
I'm not judging. I'm just saying me personally.
Couldn't run down to Walmart and buy those short shorts that men have worn coming into my store lately, which takes me back to the mommy. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I think if you actually take the time to look into this stuff, as just dive head first in, man, there's a lot of interesting correlations between all kinds of stories out there. And every single nation out there has some kind of giant story, there's no way that they all just said giants and meant someone was 6'5". You know, like it's just not possible. I'm sorry. Like, what it was exactly, I don't know. Like you talk about biblical giants and all that stuff in numbers. It's like I think it's Joshua sending scouts in to kind of check out this place that the Lord has told them, oh, this is yours. You're going to get this. And they come back being like, yeah, those grapes were gigantic. 2 men carrying a little vine of grapes. These things are huge. I'm talking about people that could step on them, like could literally step on them and squash them like bugs. That's what they were reporting seeing in this place. And I can't imagine you going to scout some location and they're this much bigger than you and being like, they could step on us like bugs. I've seen tall people. I've never once called my friends giants if they're over 6'5", like, I don't know. Like, I understand that there's a lot of, it sounds like a fairy tale. It sounds like all that, like, oh, that couldn't happen because we're so used to the world that we live in. But there's so many things and so many findings and discoveries out there that take place where you look at them and you're like, that doesn't really line up with what we were told about history or about the way things work or the way things should work. And so what is it? It's just in this cosmic void at that point, like, well, we have no idea what this is, but it's definitely not our history and it's definitely not real or it's fabricated or blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't know, at some point, you just got to be like, you know what? I believe.
You've heard of the Gigantopithecus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is basically a giant gorilla.
Yeah.
So it's possible that these things can get big, especially, who knows, back then. We don't have the records.
Sure.
Sometimes, it's hard to find ancient bones and remains and stuff like that.
Mm.
Who knows? Well, it could have just been a group of people that spread out back in the early days of people and crossed, the land bridge to get into the United States back when it was going from Alaska to Russia. And just basically migrated with all the other people.
Sure.
I have a lot of trouble with the supernatural biblical parts of it because that doesn't make sense, especially, like I said, with big giants. Unless we're going back to the days of dinosaurs, it's pretty impossible for a human to grow that big.
Unless, of course, humans coexisted with dinosaurs.
Which they didn't.
Which there's absolutely no proof of that.
I don't understand why that is I guess I do understand why that is more of a religious aspect, that to believe that people had to exist with dinosaurs because
what? Otherwise, God doesn't exist if it was just dinosaurs? Is that where you're headed with it?
I don't think that. I mean,
yeah,
I think something has to exist.
Sure. Yeah,
but
I think what it is, and like I've heard even weirder theories out there with not only that, but that dinosaurs didn't exist and that they were dragons. Like I've heard some absolutely wild theories out there regarding dinosaurs, but there's a lot of stuff that shows fossilized footprints and all that stuff with dinosaurs within, and I forget what the distance was, but like pretty much right next to human foot tracks that were in the same time area or within like 50 years of each other or something like that.
I'm not sure you can say they were human footprints. They were maybe a relative of humans.
Oh, here we go, man.
Because humans didn't exist back then. They were probably basically an ape-like creature. But even they didn't exist with dinosaurs. So I don't understand. Unless there were some remnant dinosaurs that survived past extinction, which is very possible.
Which we still technically believe in. I mean, we talk thunderbirds. There's like pterodactyl sightings and all that shit. Like there's definitely some...
Dude, there's woolly mammoth sightings still.
Well, they're bringing them back, so there's probably going to be a lot more. But
no, there's. I didn't watch the video, but as I was scrolling through looking for stuff like this, like basically a video about whether there's woolly mammoths out there still, which hard for me to believe, but maybe in Canada, maybe in Russia, parts of Russia that are very deep in the Arctic tundra, maybe.
Sure. My thing is, okay, you say like people were 5 feet roughly, right? But
they were probably closer to that than, than 6 foot.
Range-wise, sure. There's some stretch there. But then you say you're talking like Gigantopithecus and all these things. So would it make sense that monkeys were a lot bigger, humans were smaller, and then over time monkeys got smaller and humans got bigger? Like,
I think,
like where's the evolutionary line in that? If we're talking evolution, explain it to me in a way that it makes sense.
Well, I will attempt to be, but I'm not a scientist, so I can't grasp all the technological terms. But I believe the Gigantopithecus was just one of the creatures related to apes and monkeys back then. Sure. And there were still smaller monkeys, like there always were. There were larger
Mm-hmm.
There was a large gorilla. There were probably large gorillas. This is just some species that existed back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Probably had the food supply to get it that big. Who knows? I don't understand all that stuff, but it looks like that existed. Let me ask you another question, because with the 2 girls from Lighton that we talked about a couple years ago,
Yes.
they were Sasquatch.
That was the tale, yes.
What if these guys were Sasquatch? What if that's why they have red hair? And we're you have certain people that push, especially, it's not as bad now, but it used to be like, when you would look at history, anybody that wasn't white was a savage.
Sure. And if you turn the perspective, it was the opposite.
I don't know about that, but I'm just saying that's the way a lot of indigenous people were viewed for many years.
Yeah, of course. Of course, like it's the right thing. I don't mean, yes, of course. Why not?
That's just the way it was.
Yeah.
That's just the way it was. We won't go into why or who or what, or just people were different.
Sure.
Yeah. What if the Si-Te-Cah were cannibalistic Sasquatch? And maybe they didn't kill them all, but we know Sasquatch can live in other areas. I don't know why any of them would live in this area that had become more desert-like.
Yeah, pretty desolate.
Yeah, this part, Lovelock basically looks like Palmdale and Lancaster, where we grew up. It's part of the high desert. Mm-hmm. So it looks exactly the same. Where it's at, there's what's called a sink, which is like an ancient lake that's dried up.
Yeah.
So back throughout history, when people were staying there, there was plenty of food. When they look at the coprolites in the cave, which is poop, ancient poop. Nice. They can tell what they ate, and it was a lot of fish from the lake that was there, the various lakes that were there. Basically, most of their diet came from that lake area, whether it's the plants or the ducks, fish, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it wasn't just ducks; they were getting swans, basically anything that flew into that lake. And they were pretty inventive. They got to the point. Not only did they use the duck decoys, they got to the point where they would swim up and grab the ducks by their feet, or the fowl by their feet, to catch them.
You just remind me of a really dark video I watched a couple days ago, accidentally.
Oh, I hate that.
Is that a zoo?
Yeah, I don't watch that stuff. Don't go into it. No, I'm a softie.
Oh, me too, man. I was sitting there, I'm like, there's no way they're letting these kids watch this. I was like, oh, God.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think I know what you're talking about.
Some brown bear.
Yeah.
Eating a duck family.
Yeah, I heard about that. I didn't watch it, though. But
consider yourself lucky. Regarding them being Bigfoot, I think if these things were actually Sasquatch or any kind of being like that they would probably be more detailed in the description and not just be like, well, they had red hair and they were tall.
I would think so, too.
Like, you'd be like, they were hairy all over. These were gigantic bear people. Or, I feel like because these stories are all they have, right?
Yeah,
so they're going to be detailed in their descriptions of stuff. They're not just going to be willy-nilly. It's literally, especially, and I may be getting this wrong. Remember, I am a honky sitting in a garage talking about this. I have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, but it's my understanding that in native cultures and stuff like that there is actually someone that is given the position of like hearing stories and passing them on. So it's like their job to remember this story. Right. And to pass it on to the next generation. The next generation has one passed on. So like these stories are pretty, I know it's not written down or anything like that, but as far as a game of telephone can go, it's pretty accurate. Right. And I think that they would be like, oh, look at these gigantic hairy things that were trying to kill us.
Well, and when we do look at the other story we talked about, they were pretty descriptive. And you would assume that any oral tradition is going to be pretty descriptive. The problem comes with nailing down the time period, because these stories have been told for so long. Of course, there's going to be small changes based on the storytellers through the years that might throw us off. Yeah. And it's not just Native Americans that did this. I mean, basically throughout the world at one time or another, the traditions were all oral until writing was invented and spread. Before that, it was more oral and pictures on cave walls or in the dirt or type of things. I'm sure they had some kind of way of translating all this stuff. They just didn't write it down, so it made it hard. And then later on, when people started recording the stories, the person recording the stories might have put their input in it. Were they an atheist type of scientist? Were they
I hate gingers,
or were they
were
religious?
red-haired.
Yeah. And again, we did mention we'd talk about the red hair, and we've heard red hair a bunch. You know, last when we talked about that giant in Afghanistan that had red hair. I find it fascinating that everybody wants to make these things have red hair throughout different parts of the world when they come across them.
That everybody wants to make them have red hair, or that they had red hair and it's being reported that way?
I think the red hair
is a red herring. In
a lot of cases, the hair wasn't red when these things were alive.
But there's no way for you to say that for sure. I mean, well, that's all speculation, man. That's just
what's not speculation is the hair in certain soil, in certain conditions, will turn a reddish color after a lot of years.
Sure.
Fat guano probably has a lot of chemicals in it that might dye your hair.
Yeah, they used it as ancient hair dye. So, okay, you're saying that after death or whatever, when these things are buried, they have red hair, right?
Right.
What would the explanation be for the story itself, where people are being like, these things had red hair when we were fighting them? Like,
that's fascinating because that one makes it a little, we do know that hair turns red a lot of times after death, after being buried or
we do not know that. You claim to know that.
No, that is a scientific fact that has been studied.
Literally never heard that and or looked into it, so I have no say in that.
I have people. That's just what the chemicals will do.
Sure.
When your hair is sitting in, dirt with certain types of a chemical mixture,
so it doesn't turn white like old people.
Maybe it does sometimes. I don't know, man.
I thought you looked into it, man. I'm asking further questions.
I never heard of white-haired giants. I've only heard of red-haired giants.
No, I'm saying when people die and they turn to skeletons or whatever, sometimes their hair, same with old people on Earth. When they die, it turns gray.
But that's different. That's more of a pigmentation coming from the body. This is an outside source that's causing certain dead people's hair to turn color over the years. And then when people later on dig them up to study them, they're like, why do we have red-haired people in the United States or red-haired people in Africa or Asia, which would be pretty strange. And then many years later, when they had a way to figure it out, some of these people's hair did turn gray after death, and based on where they were buried or where their bodies had fallen.
But isn't this all kind of speculation? Like
that part is not speculation. Some of it turns red.
But if you're not there, if we're talking 1,500 years ago, you're telling me you're digging something up and being like, well, it's because of the chemicals in this soil.
No, this is a recent thing. In the past, it was like, oh, obviously these guys were Europeans.
So the recent thing being that they were studying the soil then, or what?
No, nowadays what they can tell what chemicals were in the soil around wherever this person was buried. And they know, and they've done tests to show that some of these chemicals in the dirt will dye your hair as you die or after you die, if you sit there long enough.
Sure, yeah.
And the hair lasts pretty long when someone dies. I mean, you can find a skeleton
with
hair
locks
right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the only thing, teeth last the longest, of course, when someone tells you, I saw a red-haired giant, my people fought the red-haired giants, you're like, okay, where the hell did this red hair come from? Now,
like, well, it can't be because it's only when they sit in soil that their hair turns red. Got them.
Well, 100 years ago, people were like, oh, these are my descendants. They were powerful, mighty men of lore that conquered these other people.
Sure.
That's why was the explanation for red hair in places that it's not supposed to be. More than likely, it's just red hair was encoded in the DNA before they even left Asia and came to the United States. And every once in a while, someone with red hair would pop out.
Nice.
And then the husband would look at the wife and be like, whose baby is this? I'm just making that up. Who knows?
Well, of course, Christian, you're making most of this up. But I just think it's an easier bridge to cross if you have stories all over the world of these red-haired giants. Some of them six-fingered even. I didn't hear any mention of that in your story.
Well, because these red-haired giants were not, I didn't find anything that said anything about six fingers. 6 fingers and 2 rows of teeth tends to be more biblical.
Sure.
Yeah. So
are you sure that you didn't find anything about 6 finger? Because I could have sworn looking into Lovelock a while ago that there was a couple claims about.
Here's the thing with Lovelock. There are a lot of claims, like there were in the West back then, of various things. Like we know about the stories of that ancient race of people in the Grand Canyon, I believe they had red hair.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's
fascinating all the same. I just, like, I know a lot of people, and even like going back to that Gigantopithecus thing and stuff like that, is like a lot of people are like, well, just over the years with evolution, everything died out, and then this is where we are now. But that just doesn't make sense to me. Like, it doesn't make sense that you would, if the entire basis of evolution is survival of the fittest, then dinosaurs would still be around.
I think survival of the fittest is kind of not the right way to say it. That's like,
but that's what it's. Look into it. That is the tagline for evolution: survival of the fittest.
But fit in our eyes means something different than what it means biologically. Like fit is strong, red-haired giants stealing the women of the tribes and having giant babies with them. Sure. That's the strong that most, especially throughout history, men are talking about. But in reality, strong is just the genetics and the area they're in, you know, depending on what's going on there. Like, you're going to be bigger if you have a lot of food. You're going to be stronger if you have a lot of food.
And you're going to wipe out everyone smaller than you if you're bigger than them. That is survival.
But that didn't happen in this case because these giants were destroyed.
This is one story in which the giants were destroyed. Then there's several.
Every story I've ever heard, the giants were destroyed by humans.
I mean, after a certain amount of time, sure. But you don't think the giants were going on rampages too, destroying, raping, pillaging cities?
I think some tall people or large or strong groups of people.
Some tall people got together.
Were going on rampages and killing people. In this case, it sounds like they were eating them.
Mm-hmm. Which is why there's a revolution against it. This is not right. You shouldn't be doing this. We need to get rid of these people.
Yeah, you can't have people eating your tribe.
And so you're met with a David and Goliath of sorts, where it's like, okay, now the little people got to rise up and we got to take these things out.
Which shows you these giants aren't necessarily biblical or supernatural. They'd have a better chance.
No, because they would have
Oh wait, the Almighty God came down to help them beat these demonic giants.
Not even that, man. Not even that. Like,
and I say that as joking. I don't have a problem with people that believe
the Almighty God.
Yeah, I don't have a problem. But giants to me are one of my favorite stories. Mm-hmm. Even though I don't believe in the supernatural part of it, I believe.
You still haven't given a good explanation as to why you don't believe that. Like, what is the explanation for giants outside of that?
I don't believe in the supernatural very easily.
I know, but like, what I'm saying is, if you don't believe that aspect of it, but you believe that giants could possibly exist, then what's the explanation for it?
My giants are a lot shorter than your giants, though.
Okay, then stop calling them giants. Call them fucking normal Americans.
No.
How's that? Average American height people. We're attacking 5-foot people. Call it what it is then.
No, because I'm calling it what the people of the time called it. And they called them giants, just like Goliath.
That's you making an assumption. And also Goliath was taller than 7 feet. But
he was still within the realm of being a human.
His brothers weren't?
They were huge. But also, I'm going to use an example from Game of Thrones.
Oh, beautiful. Yes. Let's take in.
There's a character named the Mountain.
Yes.
It's fucking huge. In the book, the actor they got is from Iceland. He's like 7 foot tall, big weightlifter guy.
Sure.
Big.
Sure.
In real life. Mm-hmm. I think he's like competes in those strongman competitions. He's a small one in his family. Mm-hmm. I've seen pictures of his brother and I think his father, and they're all bigger than him. Mm-hmm. That guy in the ancient world would look like a freaking giant.
He's only 7 feet tall.
I think he's a little over it, but
then he'd look this much bigger than.
But he's gigantic. He's built. Yeah. If you had ancient people built like that, one thing, if they're going to be powerful, they're going to dominate a lot of people. Until they dominated them too much, which is the way it always goes. They were probably human. Mm-hmm. You know, we can talk about other things on another show of what these giants. We probably will because we like giants.
Yeah, I'm not saying they weren't human. I'm saying they're 50-50.
It's kind of sad we don't talk about giants more. So
I'm telling you, the audience that loves giants loves to attack us for having a show where we don't stick 100% to the script.
Well, here, attack me because Scott kind of sticks to the script. I don't.
No, not really. I'm all over the place, man. I'm talking evolution at some point. Like, I don't fucking care at this point. Like, anything is on the table. That's what I'm saying. It's pretty much anything is on the table.
Well, and you also got to think that in the ancient past, there were different species that were similar to humans, like the Neanderthals, the Denisovans. I mean, they weren't giants, but if they existed, a tall offshoot of humans could have existed and lived alongside of humans. These giants some of them spoke the Paiute language. So they were communicating with the Paiute. They were probably living next to them, and they just every once in a while would get hungry and eat them. I think that's similar. What was the other giant story we did? Solomon Islands. It sounds a little similar in some cases to that.
Yeah.
There is a rhyme and reason to a lot of the giant stories to me, but not the ones that are 10, 15 feet. I just struggle with that one, and I always will until you can show me the bodies that supposedly exist and were hidden conveniently by the Smithsonian Institute. Here's the thing. It just popped in my head. I was saying how you would think that people would release this information because it supports the biblical idea of it, and we're a Christian nation,
no,
basically. We
are not.
Our
we
nation
can claim it, but we are not.
And I'm saying it in name, not like the following. So most Americans, even if it's different recently, throughout time, has been raised in a more Christian believing environment, whether they acted that way or not. Most of our rules and laws are based on, just, stuff like that you might find in the Bible. We've tried to live. The first people that came to this country were definitely religious. But when you get to the part where we're founding the nation, you get the founding fathers, they're more deist than Christians.
Yeah.
Maybe people like that were maybe behind a cover up because I don't know why they would do that. Maybe they didn't want it to be a biblical thing. Maybe they didn't believe in the woo. I mean, we know that about some of them. Thomas Jefferson basically made a Bible where he took out all the supernatural elements of Jesus's life. And
he said, fixed it. Yeah.
And he hid it because that would have been weird back then.
Yeah.
They didn't find it till after his death, I believe.
Yeah. I think.
Also, dedication. This guy went through the whole Bible through his life and knew where to cut out pieces.
That's not a lot of dedication. There's a lot of people that read the Bible front to back multiple times in their life. Not me, but that's
some
fine.
of them are crazy.
Some of them are crazy, but you go talking about why would there be a cover up? Why would it make sense that they would be hiding these things? Like
Satan.
No, not even that. I think like you're onto something with the cutting out the supernatural or whatever, or like anything that is any stretch outside of what we consider normal. But you look at this country in general, right? Are we a Christian nation? Quote unquote. I know on paper, yes, but
no, and I'm probably not explaining it right. It's not Christian in that we follow the teachings of Christ kind of nation.
Yeah.
It's that our foundation, the European foundation, is based around Christianity, and it influences everything in this nation, even for the non-believers. And that's just the way it goes. I mean, it's just the way this country has been influenced. You'll see it. You go to the Middle East, you'll see a different influence there.
Sure. There's influences all over.
And even though Christianity and Judaism was in that region 1,000 years before Islam, those countries tend to have an Islamic influence.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So it's just the way that nations form when they have a religion. And
yeah, but what I'm saying is remove religion from all of it. What I'm saying is our country is known.
I feel like we're getting political and we just got called out for that.
No, yeah, we did just get called out for that, Christian, but this isn't political. I'm saying that our country is known not for religion. It's known for propaganda. It's known for, controlling narratives. It's known for different things so you look at Hollywood, you look at the mainstream media.
That's going too far. That's going into the conspiracy crap.
Everything points to removing any ideologies of God.
I'm not talking about that stuff. That's modern times. You don't have to. That's modern times. I'm not talking about
where we're at. We're in the modern times.
I'm not talking about modern times. I'm talking about what influenced our way of thinking as we became a country.
So you're saying back when these bones were allegedly being discovered, that there was no reason to cover it up?
I don't see any reason to cover it up. I think it's fascinating that people believe that, but I also don't necessarily think that the Smithsonian Institute has giant bones.
Yeah, well, number one, they do. But
I don't know how we know that. That's speculation.
Nobody knows that. It's all, I mean, I'm sure there's some people out there who'll be like, well, actually.
This is where we're going to get some hate because I'm sitting there saying, no, the Smithsonian Institute did not have a conspiracy to cover up giants.
Anyone that's ever listened to Blurry Creatures is just screaming at their phone and or computer right now.
I mean, I don't understand why that upsets people, though.
because nobody likes being told that there's a different opinion than their own.
That is true. I was listening to a podcast where they were talking about that yesterday, and it's just, all of it was is people hate each other when they have a different opinion now, which
it's confirmation bias or nothing.
So yeah, it's in this world, and we sit there and blame somebody else for all the problems, but kind of that way of thinking is the problem.
It is definitely a problem.
We can disagree. That's fine.
This entire podcast is us disagreeing for 4 years now. So yeah.
Without doing it in a way where we're cussing at each other or calling each other stupid or...
Well, not great examples.
No. Not to my face, at least.
I think, wait for you to leave. I think when these things were first being discovered, there's plenty of articles written about them. There's plenty of sightings, plenty of pictures, all this stuff. And granted, now you can't trust a picture on the internet to save your life. Don't even try it.
And you couldn't trust an article written back then either.
Well, you can't trust them now either.
That's where yellow journalism came from. Mm-hmm. And if I'm a writer out in the western part of the country back then, which is sparsely inhabited, not very big, you can come up with some, I found these giants from Egypt in the Grand Canyon. Where are they now?
You can, but
the Smithsonian took them. What?
Yeah, and that's entirely possible. No, what I'm saying is, again, we're in a situation where are there a lot of misinformation articles out there just trying to get people to either come visit or whatever, trying to build tourism or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, even if we say 95% of them are fake articles, that still leaves 5% of people that actually went out there looking for these things, discovered these things, and then was trying to spread the word that, hey, look, there was giants in this land. And people are like, anytime that happens, like, no. It just doesn't make sense to me to 100% say that every single article written about these things, anything, there's some at 12 feet, 15 feet, 30 feet, 100 feet, whatever you want to call it. I was watching a reel yesterday.
That's what I call it, bullshit.
And I bet you can guess who it's by. And we're not going to do it because we're not going to call them out. But talking about mountains being like giant, fossilized giants, pretty much like certain mountains because of the pareidolia that you see.
What the fuck is that? What the?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying, man. Exactly. There's a vast divide between 30 feet and a mountain.
But also, there's a mountain that we can see from here.
There's a sleeping lady.
Yeah, that's supposed to be a giant.
Mm-hmm.
So
and that's a pretty big mountain, Christian.
Yeah, I mean, all the mountains on a lot. I remember thinking, remember the mountains near the desert where we grew up? We were like, oh, those are kind of big. And then you get to Alaska and you're like, those are hills compared to this.
Yeah, that is true. We had baby giants.
Yeah. And we don't even have, like, our mountains are pretty tall, but there's some that are, it's just nuts how big everything is out here. But yeah, somebody out there is saying that the mountains are fossilized giants. That's what you're telling me. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've heard that story. I mean, those stories are all over from indigenous people. It's a mythic tale.
I've heard, what is it? What's the term for it? There was like the oxygen was more dense or something like that. But like people say that there's certain mountains that are tree stumps, you know, that like what's that? Do you remember what it's called? The
tree stumps, petrified forest or something like that?
No, like there's an actual terminology for the air in that time, like the actual atmosphere and stuff like that could have produced this, whatever it is.
I mean, that's partially when the environment was different. We're talking millions of years ago.
Yeah, you're talking millions of years. Yeah,
like
I'm trying to figure out
when the dinosaurs walked the earth without humans.
Oh, no, yes, that didn't happen. So that was,
I mean, there were rodents that were mammalian, but other than that, there were no monkeys, no humans. There were sharks, the megalodon.
Well, I mean, that's your personal opinion. And people know when they come to this podcast that your personal opinion is usually caca, and that's fine. Yeah, I don't know, man. Yeah, and like we kind of talked about it, like with people just being outlandish in this genre and like clickbaity and all that shit. And I'm going to start just roasting the hell out of them by using nothing but clickbaity thumbnails now. So you're welcome for that. And just know when I do
it's not clickbaity if you follow it up with
information.
Yeah,
I know, but mine's going to actually be clickbaity. It's going to be so clickbaity. They're like, he's got to be doing this as a joke. And the answer is yes, I will be. But that's beside the point. I don't know.
You really like that little giant mountains. Like, this is a problem with us. How do we come to that?
I don't know. And look,
it's
I'm someone.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm someone that thinks that anything is possible. Anything, literally anything. You tell me some crazy shit, I'll be like, yeah, I could see it, or I could make the pieces fit in a way. But that is that's a bit of a stretch for me.
Bit of a stretch.
That's what I'm saying. Just a little bit. It's just a little bit of a stretch. Tall as trees, absolutely. Tall as mountains, that's where I stop. But who am I? I'm just a dumbass in a garage, man. I got no idea. But it's fascinating to talk about all the same.
You're hurting my brain. I don't know why that stumped me so much. I'm like, Yeah, I've heard the stories. That's what they call mountains because they kind of look like, some of them kind of do look like that from a distance.
Yeah, let's throw pareidolia right out the window.
But no, these are real. These are giants.
There was an interesting claim in there about, was it pink granite or something like that? Like a lot of these locations have pink granite, and that's what the founding fathers or whoever in Washington, D.C., like all these buildings are built with bases of this shit.
Because it's pretty.
Sure. The pink granite is allegedly giant flesh. Yeah, see, now it all makes sense for you. Now you're a believer.
I am not. That just makes it worse. Nah, man. Also,
I get
Scott is always right.
Oh, thanks, man.
It's giant flesh because it's pink, right?
It could be, but it's also
petrified giant flesh.
Pretty much. That's the claim. Yeah.
Mother.
Look, man, I'm not telling you to believe it. I'm just saying these are the random things that I find now. And I'm like, ugh, come on, man. And that tells me that it's just people looking for clicks. Like you've given up on trying to share any kind of information or anything like that.
No, sometimes I think people believe this stuff and that's why they talk about it. Because, from looking into stuff, there's some beliefs that you're like, and you tend to be a believer, but there's some out there that I see you're like, what the hell? And some of it, what if some of it's just straight out disinformation fed to these people by certain people in power, like they did back with UFOs, to just throw us all off?
Now you see, you're getting into, and we should probably close out on this because people are screaming at their car radios. And I'll tell you off the air, but that is entirely possible.
I think it is possible, and it's a fact that's been done many times.
Yeah, and I've been told by someone that when
CIA.
No, I wish they'd approach us, but we don't have the following for that yet. I would 100% take that for the record. If the CIA comes to us and is like, "Hey, we'll give you $2 million if you just start feeding out this random shit," just know that your boy is hopping on that faster than anything I've ever done in my life.
You know what? If they did that, I would be like, okay, but we actually need some real stories too to mix in.
Yeah, well, that's the idea. But for me, I just need our listeners to know that it's not a betrayal. It's me setting myself up for life. But also, I'll give you signs and you'll know that it's like this trickery foot. In the middle of an episode that is disinformation, I'll just make bird noises halfway through. And you'll be like, oh shit, don't believe any of this. So I'll save you guys while also putting a hefty penny in my bank account because your boy doesn't have an issue with selling out.
Yeah, if you all of a sudden hear me say 15-foot giants are real, the CIA got to us. Demons exist.
Wow, they must have already gotten here. Anyway, fascinating story. Those of you that aren't currently hate typing on your keyboards, what do you think? Lovelock Cave, giants, where do you fall? I'm pretty sure that most of our actual audience isn't believing in giants. I think there's probably a handful of folks that I've talked to over the years that like are on my side with this. Most people are like, nah, it seems like a stretch, literally.
Are you on Scott's side of 15, 20-foot or bigger giants? Or are you on my side who think that giants are just tall humans?
They're just 6 foot tall people.
I mean, 6 foot tall is a smaller giant based on my theories.
Okay, you have to call me a smaller giant then.
But 7 foot is different. I did find out that 20% of the population is 6 feet tall.
Wow, aren't they lucky?
Yes, because I'm not quite there. I wish I was.
I don't think I'm like 5'11 and a half or some crap like that. So I just need to get some.
I'm afraid
some boosters
to measure myself now because I will.
Because you shrank with age.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're probably like 5'7". No,
I'm not that.
You're 5'1",
5'9" maybe. But I
think you're probably 5'10". I think my dad's like 5'8" or 5'9", and he's shorter than you are.
Okay, that's a good sign. Then. I haven't shrunk that far yet.
Yes, we did it. Anyway, nobody cares at this point. Guys, sound off in the comments.
Tell us what giant stories you want us to talk about next, because there's a bunch of them out there.
Mm-hmm. And also, find us on social media at Freaky Deaky Pod, wherever you're at. If you're on YouTube, commenting, subscribing, sharing, whatever, it's honestly the best way to help us grow. It helps us surpass these pesky little algorithms. And, word of mouth is really our only marketing strategy at the moment. We've been lucky enough to get a couple of shout outs from some decent sized folks, some good folks, and let's keep that train rolling, huh? If you're new to the show.
If you have the name of a famous person and you listen to our podcast, tell us.
Yes. Yeah, we saw ads recently. It was for a cereal, and the ad was Serena Williams enjoys or eats our cereal or something like that. And then the tagline underneath that was, she's just some random lady from this place, but she does enjoy it. And so this company is going out getting people with celebrity names to endorse their product, and they're really just random folks that happen to have celebrity names. So we need to do that too. If you have a pretty interesting celebrity name and you endorse this show, let us know so we can turn it into an advertisement.
Just for fun.
Just for fun. to see if it works, you know what I mean? But in the meantime, if you have stories of your own, or if you have corrections for this episode or anything like that, send it into the gang at thefreakydeaky.com. We are, I believe next week, we are actually diving into volume 7 of Strange Listener Stories. Oops, sorry, Bleeful.
Cannibal listener stories.
Freaky Listener Stories, Volume 7 is dropping next week, and Volume 8 is pretty much halfway full. So if you want to be in that, now's your time to send in stories. We love hearing from them. Follow us on Instagram, socials, wherever you're at Freaky Deaky Pod. And we will catch you right back here next week on The Freaky Deaky. Goodbye.
Also, Scott is always right. Demons exist.
Man, it feels a lot later than it should.